Hello?
Hey, bud. I'm still muted.
Nope, you're not anymore.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, hell yeah. What's up, bud?
Hey, I have never called a person and had them pre-muted. Nice. It's like the universe is trying to keep me from engaging friendly with a cop. How you doing?
Well, and it could be because I'm in Chud. So,
Wait,
so
are
maybe
you?
maybe I'm odd. Oh yeah.
But you're
Oh
so
yeah.
friendly in chat.
I try to be.
Uh-oh.
It's but Mother Goose and I talked about some of my Chud takes, and it didn't work out so great. But
Damn,
it's
the Discord mods usurping authority yet again. I'm terribly sorry about that.
No. I was actually thinking this long before we talked. I think you and I probably have a lot of things that we can talk about productively, but I also do think that there's sometimes where you notice logical fallacies or bad takes or whatever, and you just smell blood in the water and you go in hard. I think that's entirely possible within our interactions. I do want to keep it always good faith, always trying to figure out the best thing, always looking for points of compromise. But
So you're
I
not
do think
looking
it's
you're not looking
possible.
to destroy me intellectually?
No, no. Actually, I would say even for all the times that I've seen you kind of like go in hard on people or whatever, it's not the logic that's the issue at all. It's almost like it's almost just like the optics. You know what I'm saying? It's not. I almost have no objections on your logic.
The optics are often harder to control than the logic. Some arguments are pretty much factually settled and have been for an incredibly long time. It's usually a little bit more difficult to parse out how to deliver that information. Because you happen to share a name with a famous YouTuber, would you like to identify yourself for the benefit of the chat?
Sure. Yeah, actually, I'm a very small YouTuber. Probably only started in the past like 45 to 60 days. Really, I've wanted to do this for nearly a decade. And the name is almost like entirely intentional as well. I get misrepresented as ContraPoints all the time, which I just see as good because now I'm just clout chasing. But I do try to have my own takes and my own perspective, and I want to have good conversations with smart people. And my background is I grew up multiple places. I lived in Belgium when I was 8 years old. I was raised in the French school system. Got my ass kicked in French until I was 12. Moved to Texas, moved back to Florida, which is kind of my home state. Joined the military, went to Japan, went to Iraq, went to California, came home, went to school, and then became a cop for 4 years. And then I just stopped being a cop 6 months ago, and now I'm a private sector wagey.
Nice. How's the wagey cagey holding up for you?
It's actually pretty good. I have weekends off. I'm working 40-hour weeks instead of 60-hour weeks. There's less chances of me fighting drug addicts or getting shot. So the wage cage, I know I can understand how it would suck for people who just went to college and then immediately go sit at a desk and stare at a screen 60 hours a week. But for me, it's actually a refreshing change of pace.
Yeah, understandable. You know, having your perspective sort of realigned by prior experience is pretty important for being able to enjoy a current one. Let's get, I guess, immediately to it. So you were a cop, and you've, at least when speaking with me, spoken on cop issues. What was your opinion, broadly speaking, of the UPS shooting that took place 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, that's actually that. We talk about militarization of police, and I think that's a pretty important conversation, but I think I almost disagree in a different way, where I think that cops need to be trained better tactically. I know there's an argument to be made that gets them into this warrior mentality. With the more warrior mentality, they're going to be looking for opponents to fight. But there was a way to run that situation from a tactical perspective that would have put less lives in danger, would have had less impact on the general public, and then also, going along with the concept of good tactics is also the concept of de-escalation. It's like, hey, we got them pinned. They're pinned in traffic. Can we get some cop vehicles in front of traffic in order to hold them in? Maybe we don't need to go straight for a gunfight. The police contention is obviously that they took fire, which is why they returned fire. But who really knows who pulled what trigger when adrenaline's going 1,000 miles an hour?
Also, I don't know if that's an entirely permissible excuse to start open firing when behind the truck you're firing at as civilian vehicles. You know. Um,
Legally, it is,
well,
but
legally, sure, but
is it a good idea? No,
yeah.
probably not. Well,
Well,
and actually, I do have an expansion on that as well.
mhm,
There's kind of like this Monday morning quarterbacking or fear by police that if they don't follow policy directly, they're going to incur the wrath of their department. But then there's also this other thing where it's like if you risk your life and all's well that ends well, then you don't get that punished. So I basically I saw them chasing the UPS vehicle for like 10 minutes beforehand. There was every opportunity to do a pit maneuver, which is basically where you hit their rear wheel well in order to try to spin them out. There was every opportunity to pull in front of the vehicle and stop in front of them, but then of course you're running the risk of you yourself getting shot. One of the reasons why I was kind of like, reeing internally as I was listening to your stream is
mhm.
because most cops have soft armor. They don't wear hard plates. So any rifle round can basically go through any cop's body armor unless they're on a SWAT team. And then also, most cops' vehicles do not have armor in their doors. Some police departments have opted to put armor in the doors, but besides that, it's a weight, economy, and fuel issue. So most cop vehicles, you shoot them with a bullet, it's going to go straight through.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I obviously am not familiar with the particulars of police tactics or the specific armaments that they're provided. My broader issue is on behavior and mannerisms because there are a lot of. Most people agree the UPS cop shooting thing went pretty poorly. Obviously, I doubt the department is happy with the attention that they're getting from all of this. So when you talk about ways that this could have been addressed, there are a bunch of like ways you can step back. Like tactically, they could have approached this a lot better. Some people have said, for example, they should have never been there in traffic, that the truck was tagged, that there was a helicopter on the scene, and that given the fact that the gunmen, well, they had guns, it was unlikely that they were going to be able to peacefully resolve a dispute through like 18 cop cars filing in. They probably should have sent like a negotiator or someone else after they had been freed sort of from proximity with civilians. I've heard some people say that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that would have been a viable solution then? Obviously, there are risks. The gunmen could just shoot the hostage at a certain point. They're not expected to be rational actors. But I think that if a broader, risk assessment would find that for the most part, hostage negotiations tend to end pretty well, I think it's like 85 to 90% of them end without bloodshed. So
Yeah, and I mean, like, there's an argument to be made that if they had just let them get away and tracked with a helicopter, chances are they would have pulled into like an industrial complex, ditched the car, and ran away on foot, leaving the UPS driver either alive or dead. At which point, you don't have all this collateral damage. But you have to conceptualize this from the human level as well, and also kind of from like a holistic perspective. The way that cops act is similar to the way white blood cells act in the human body. Basically, meaning that when they see a threat or a pathogen or whatever, they all swarm the area. I think even in the human body, somebody like a biologist could correct me, but there is collateral damage to white blood cells swarming an area and attacking. I don't know if
but
they
is
attack
that
healthy cells, but
good?
no, it's not good. But it's kind of like I don't even want to say a logical response. It's almost like a natural response. And then just talking about how to manage things, you kind of got to see it like a dog chasing a car. He's not thinking about what he's going to do when he actually catches it. That's the way that a lot of police respond to specific incidents, especially when it involves violence, because violence is kind of it's a rare thing, and I don't mean rare like it never happens. I just mean out of the job of being a police officer, it's not your day to day. Now, sure, you deal with like batteries, you deal with burglaries, you deal
Yeah,
with
for the
robberies, all
most
that kind of
part, like
stuff.
firing a gun is a pretty rare event in most officers, day to day, I would
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah, like which is strange too, because we also have to talk about different departments, big city versus small city, counties versus all that kind of stuff. But I have friends who work big cities who they're basically telling me that every single night they're pointing their guns at somebody in order to effect an arrest. I think, whereas with me, that's happened, but I would say that happened probably dozen, maybe 2 dozen times in my career where I really thought that I was actually gonna potentially shoot someone. So it's really a question of like intensity, and then also with bigger departments, when you're sticking your gun in somebody's face every single night, I think that increases your opportunities for lapses in judgment, just through frequency of incident.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the more opportunities you have to maybe commit violence or engage in violent encounters, the more likely it is something's going to go wrong. I don't disagree with that at all. I
Mhm.
guess you earlier said that you think that police could probably benefit from more tactical training. Um, I would argue that in some cases like this, there is a certain gung ho mentality, or an enthusiasm for the opportunity to demonstrate those skills that sometimes leads to incidences like this. Do you think that's a valid criticism?
Yeah, absolutely. But the interesting thing that I found through my experience is I think there's this whole perspective that Iraq war and Afghanistan war veterans are coming home and they got a chip on their shoulder because they're used to shooting jihadists overseas. So they come home and they treat the home territory like a war zone. My experience was actually the opposite, where basically the civilian cops, basically people who had never served in the military before,
Or way
they
worse. Yeah, soldiers are taught way better rules of engagement than cops are.
well, and I would say that it's also a question of exposure. So cops talk about use of force and violence all the time, but even me, just as a Marine, basically an administrator, somebody who did not do intense things while I was in the Marine Corps, even though I deployed, and there were some intense situations, but not a lot.
Mhm.
I spent weeks and weeks and weeks and months getting, punched in the head, thrown on the ground, arm bar takedown, kicked, shoved, all that kind of stuff. And I did that to, my fellow teammates. Same thing with, shooting. Like I've gone into tactical scenarios as an individual. I've gone into tactical scenarios in a group. When I'm working with veterans, or when I was working with veterans, I always found that so much more comfortable because everybody knew what everybody was doing. Whereas when I was working with civilian cops, A, I saw them get overexcited, and B, I saw that their awareness of their firearms and what was going on with the firearms was kind of shitty. And basically as much a threat to me as it was to the general public or the bad guy we were chasing.
I mean, the average cop is, let's be frank, a low IQ high school bully, former wannabe football pro who can't make it with any intellectual skills. Now, I think this is a fairly valid stereotype for a lot of departments. There have been
Can I
literally
push
people who have
back a
been
little
booted from
bit?
departments for being too intelligent. I mean, and the fraternal mentality in these groups is bordering on like sophomoric. I think there's a good reason why a lot of people have worse opinions of cops in the U.S. than they do in other places. I have worse opinions of cops than I do of soldiers by far. I mean, surely you've observed some of these tendencies in your time.
Sure, but I also think it's a question of sample, and I hate to be like so nuanced. Like we're not getting
No, feel
spicy enough.
free.
We're not.
Pick the nits. Don't worry about it.
We're I'm looking for something to fight you on. It's not working because I'm trying to be nuanced. But the no, I mean, okay. So do you have those people, the former football players? Yeah, sure. And do those people, or at least some of those people, tend to be the aggro people? Sure. Do the people who were bullied in high school and they have a complex about them having a badge now? Are they the most likely people to flex nuts and kind of talk shit to grandma because she was 10 miles over the speed limit? Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that. But I would say that the diversity within departments is actually probably, at least within Florida, which is a cosmopolitan, place. Lots of different people live here. Lots of different kinds of people live here. We diversity is our strength. You know what I'm saying? Like I worked with female cops, I worked with gay cops, I worked with straight cops, I worked with black cops, I worked with Caribbean black cops, I worked with Puerto Rican cops, Mexican cops. Like there's so many different kinds of people, and they all bring different experiences to the job.
You're not
And
just
really,
speaking anecdotally. I've actually seen research in this subject. Not only does general department diversity lead to increased effectiveness of police departments, but neighborhoods are generally better policed by police officers who are representative of the demographics in that neighborhood.
although what's actually funny about that is I have a gentleman who I worked with who was born and raised in the neighborhood in which I worked. And you would see, me, the white mayo bread cop, on the exterior, basically having a cokehead talking shit to me. And I'm like, yes, sir. No, sir. That's not what we're doing today, sir. Can I explain it to you, sir? And then this guy from the neighborhood would be like, he'd be like taking off his badge and taking off his gun belt so he could fist fight the guy. Like, but that's like in his community, that's what's respected. It's like, you talk a certain level of shit, you disrespect a certain person a certain way, then it doesn't matter what your title is. It doesn't matter what your position of power is. If you're willing to be disrespected as a person that way, then you're kind of showing weakness. Now, it never came to pass that he was disciplined, because basically when he was taking off his badge or taking off his belt, whoever was talking shit ended up stopping, because they basically knew who he was and what his family was like. And then with me, my approach was the correct approach for who I was, because if I'm talking shit, if you get a body camera of a white cop talking shit, taking off his badge and his gun belt so he can fist fight a guy in the middle of the street, that might be some like old Western shit that people would enjoy on a reptilian level, but it's not exactly what you want out of your career.
To be fair, I feel like even if the cop was black and there was body cam footage of them doing that, there might still be a little bit of discontent with that one. But yeah, I can see how that might not play well to the optics department. The issue,
Sorry,
really quickly, the issue that I have with this is, so I mean, I could go on and on about like appropriate rules of engagement to the limited extent of my understanding. I'm not a cop, obviously. But the broader issue that I and a lot of other people have is it feels like when it comes to institutions like this, cops are invested in with a ton of power, a huge amount of responsibility. And for that reason, it can be difficult for us to effectively second guess what it is they're attempting to do. And with that said, the reason we have issue with sort of sussing out which behavior is acceptable and not is because cops are incapable of self-checking. It seems like a police department is a machine designed to avert responsibility for misbehavior, which is why people don't do this, one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. Police investigations internally are frequently squashed. The DA works with the cops, so they're disincentivized from going after cops for crimes. Stuff like that really adds up, and it makes it impossible for us to trust police to regulate their own behavior, which means we have basically no choice but to speculate. And when you're speculating on an incredibly powerful institution that is in many respects above the law, in terms of how they apply it, and isn't capable of self-checking, those criticisms are going to be pretty substantial, pretty harsh. Rightfully so, I think. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key to combat this is basically transparency, which, sadly, as a police officer, you're not allowed to have while you're on the job. Speaking on behalf of a police department is illegal, or at least against policy for any individual law enforcement officer to do. So even if they wanted to have a conversation similar to how you and I are right now about individual incidents, tactics, legality, policy, good ethics, emotional intelligence, psychology, violence, any of these like much longer conversations that
But you
need
can't.
to be had.
Yeah, you're punished for.
You literally
down on
can't. Yeah, you literally can't. And that's one of the things is I have a gentleman who I love as a brother and respect, who's still on the force. He's a Democrat, probably a liberal, not a leftist. But one of the things that really chafes his ass is, he basically thinks that we're shooting ourselves in the foot, and I don't think anybody would disagree with this, by not being transparent, by not communicating the actual roles and responsibilities of law enforcement, the limitations on our power and the lack of limitations on our power. We're basically doing ourselves a disservice. So when we have these bad apples and nobody is speaking up, then we're kind of basically, pretending that everything is okay. And even us ourselves within the industry know that almost nothing is okay. If you're talking about, just the way patrol is run, if you're talking about the way that investigations are conducted, if you're talking about the internal politics, if you're talking about low-level corruption and the cover-up of it, if you're talking about conflict of interest, thanks, bud. If you're talking about conflict of interest between the DA and law enforcement, you literally can't talk about any of it while you're inside the system, and then the second you leave the system, your information is outdated. So,
Yeah, outdated,
for instance,
and if you talk about it, like you become a pariah, right? Like there's a strong fraternal mentality there. I think that will often encourage cops to cover up for the misbehaviors of others, or to sort of dogpile cops who are open about the misbehavior of others.
Well, and I would say that's regional as well. I think in Florida, particularly, just because we are in the South, and union mentality is not particularly strong.
Mhm.
We basically all contribute $20 a month to a union. That way, if we get sued, a lawyer will represent us. That's about the totality of the fraternal order of
I grew up in
police in the
LA,
state of
so
Florida.
they're pretty fucking bad there.
Well, actually, can I speak on that,
Of
because
course.
the tribal mentality is especially strong in the Northeast. I think through history, but it's also much stronger in city police departments, and that's because they are so frequently exposed to violence. They are so frequently the attacks of public perception. They have so many opportunities to fuck up and be called out on it, that there is this otherization and also internal tribal mentality. Now, I'm not saying I didn't have that. Of course I had that. And just to speak real quickly, because I don't want to tangent away from this, I feel like it's a really important topic.
Hmm.
I saw, low level corruption, people fudging statistics, people, basically going to a parking lot to park instead of, and, basically watch movies instead of do their job.
We've all seen the turning the lights on so you can run the red light to get there faster, but then
Exactly.
turning them off at the other side. Yeah, we've all seen that move.
Although, I mean, I pulled that move because I was trying to get to a call faster, and because the reason why the lights went back off is because I'm trying not to alert the bad guy. So that's yes, it happens where people are just trying to violate traffic laws because they're cops and they think they're better than everybody. But also, I've done that tactic myself, and it's because I wasn't a coward who basically wanted. This is actually an interesting part of low level corruption. If you leave your lights and sirens on while you're approaching a crime, then there's a chance that the bad guy is going to hear you and he's going to escape. So therefore, that decreases your possibility of catching him, and basically increases his chance of escape.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like me, shut off your lights and sirens when you're still a mile and a half out, you actually have the chance of catching him. So if I'm still trying to get there to make an arrest, I'm going to do stuff like that. So yes and no. But then just to get back to low level corruption that I wouldn't call out. The reason why I wouldn't call it out is because you're completely reliant on those people for your health and well-being. I like you. I think you're a good dude. Parasocially love you a little bit, all that
Thanks.
jazz. But but at the same time, at the end of the day, you're not on the street with me. You're not wearing soft armor. You're not wearing a battle belt. I can try to be accountable to you.
Not yet. The revolution's coming, brother. You don't know it's coming. You better watch your mouth. You never know if you and I are going to be Molotoving back to back in a few weeks. Really though, I get it. I completely
We're gonna
understand.
have to jump through some political hoops first, but I mean, I'm not ruling it out as a possibility.
We'll get you there. I do get it though, and I think this is the nuance that a lot of broader discussions, especially from leftists, miss. Okay, so I hate the police as an institution. I despise it. Individual police officers, they're people. I've had a range of experiences, positive, negative. A police officer used to drive me to high school every day. I had a walk. It was 30 minutes. I liked the walk, and the buses were slow in LA, and she'd drive me, and she was great. And I'm sure she was good at her job, too. But one of the broader systemic sort of concerns is that a lot of people who are leftists, we feel as though we feel as though this moralistic approach towards the police as an institution, this idea that cops are bad, that all cops are bastards or whatever, sort of informs policy positions. And I'm not entirely sure if I agree with that holistically, because there are bad people, there are murderers and rapists, there are crimes that, when committed, should probably be dealt with by the state. And you need to get someone out there. It's going to be a police officer in this day and age. Oh, is everything good back there?
Everything's fine for me. I'm sorry if is there extra sound?
No, the mic is actually cutting out a little bit. Do you have it on push to talk or on open mic?
Should be open mic, to be honest. So I'll just move it a little closer to my face.
Gotcha. Because there are people out there for whom cops are probably a reasonable response. I don't think that cops do all harm. But some people have fronted the argument that there's no way for cops to do more good than they do harm with the system being implemented as it is now. And this definitely varies from community to community. Again, I grew up in a big city, so my experiences are informed largely by that. But I'm sure you're aware of this. You're familiar with the New York City cop strike that took place following it was the mayor, I think, standing up for Eric Garner, I believe, after he was murdered by the police, if I'm remembering this correctly.
Yeah, and this is where I'm not saying I'm gonna get ugly or defensive or anything like that, but there's
No,
a lot that goes into these incidents. So specifically with Eric Garner, with what's Mr. Mike Brown, that's Ferguson, correct?
Uh-oh, you're not going to defend the Eric Garner killing, are you?
No.
Okay. Just making sure.
But there's multivariant factors going on here, and I'm not trying to make it nuanced just to escape judgment. I'm just trying to say that I don't. For me, the entire problem with that situation isn't necessarily the arrest itself or whether or not cops should be able to arrest somebody for, resisting arrest or whatever you want to talk about. The problem for me is the broken windows policy that basically led to that in the first place. The reason why Eric Garner was arrested multiple times and out of frustration resisted arrest that day was because he was being harassed and, basically arrested repeatedly for selling loose cigarettes. I have a fairly libertarian perspective on this, which is if it doesn't fucking hurt anybody and nobody gives a shit, then what's the problem? So seeing, members of the state, affect an arrest over what basically amounts to a victimless crime seems like a massive waste of state resources. I think I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, where you attack poor people basically who are just trying to get by, who are doing things that I don't want to say are purely victimless crimes, but are
largely crimes. Not that destructive in the grand scheme of things.
Who gives a shit about somebody selling loose cigarettes? That's one of the most stupid laws to enforce. You're literally, and this is one of the things that I think we're lacking as a society. When I was trained, when I went through the academy, they basically said, the Constitution is written in such a way that any human being within the United States, regardless of their citizen status, if they're not committing crimes, they should not have to encounter the police. This flies in the face of broken windows. This flies in the face of stop and frisk. But that's the way that our Constitution was written. So whenever you take somebody's freedom, you stick them in metal bracelets and you throw them in a cage, it's supposed to be this moment of near religious violation. You have destroyed the freedom of another human being. It is not a cause for celebration. It is not something that you want to encourage. It is not something that you want to have as a revolving door. But in our society, it absolutely
is. It totally fucking is. Yeah, there are swaths, neighborhoods, ghettos where your entire judicial and economic future are basically controlled by a system of policies and social forces that you have no control over and that are enforced by the police.
Total agreement. And my child care, so I might be jumping on and off. Hold on, I might be jumping on and off mute minutes as I get my child care taken care of.
No worries, comrade.
But in general, yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we need to get back to is we need to see arrest as a near religious violation. And if you could just give me 120 seconds to talk to chat or whatever, I'm going to get this situated.
I love talking to chat. Go for it. He's a dad. What do you want? Right? I assume that's his kid and not some other kid. I don't know. I believe when I say ACAB, and I do say ACAB, I'm using it euphemistically. I don't actually believe that all cops are bastards. If we mean bastard to mean a bad person, that's ridiculous. I've met plenty of cops. Some of them were good people. Really genuinely good people. Some of them were even aware of the systemic problems with the police. But when we say ACAB, at least when I say ACAB, I'm not literally saying ACAB. I don't actually mean the semantic definition of the words. What I'm actually saying is that the police as an institution are bad and must be fought. It's a call of aggression and of disdain for that institution. It's like, the phrase, no justice, no peace, with the civil rights protesters. They weren't literally saying, no justice, no peace, right? You wouldn't go up to a person saying no justice, no peace because they're being treated as a second-class citizen, and then you're like, oh yeah, you want just, oh yeah, no justice, huh? So I could just fucking bop you, huh? Yeah. Oh, you got a problem with that? Wow, I guess you do want some justice, huh? Do you? No, the semantic and the practical definition of terms, words, phrases, they can vary sometimes. It's happened before, it happens here. And I want people to be clear about that. When I do the ACAB stuff, it's not about individually hating individual cops. I think that's ridiculous. And it's not dialectical. The antagonism is directed at the system. The reason the phrase is all cops are bastards is because it's a reminder that no matter how individually good a cop is, they're still complicit to a broader exploitative system. So you can have good cops who nonetheless do harm by being cops. Hence, all cops are bastards. Hence, fuck the police. Hence, and so on and so on.
Hashtag Vosh canceled again.
Not this time. How's your kid doing?
He's good. I just had some wage come over so they can try to watch him while we stream. The wife is also a wagey, so she had to go into work as well.
Gotcha.
So we'll see how good that works, and hopefully we can talk in peace for a while. But the no, I mean, like I don't disagree with you in the slightest. I think it's kind of supposed to be getting back to being a cop is a bad thing. Not like the profession isn't noble, but you have to see it in the same way as like soldiering or any other.
I do see it in the same way as soldiering.
Yeah, a profession of violence, and basically the nobility of the job is supposed to come out of people being self-sacrificial, showing higher principles in demanding situations, being the better person when they can, despite all of the things they've seen and all the things they've done. That's supposed to be the nobility of the profession, but the profession itself is actually supposed to be kind of disgusting and heart-wrenching and emotional and fucked up and all that kind of shit.
Well, generally, any profession that has to be sold on claims of honor and virtue is usually one people wouldn't do otherwise. Cops do have difficult jobs. Well, I imagine most of them. There are probably some small-town cops who legitimately do just, nap in their car all day. But I imagine for most folk, it's a fairly stressful job. And that's why I don't like to get bogged down in the particulars of the individual good an individual cop does. More like, here are some systemic issues. How the fuck do we fix that with police being the way they are now? Like, for example, police unions and the internal sort of code of conduct protecting bad officers from any consequences for their actions, which has gotten better with the rise of body cameras, I think. That's definitely helped a lot. So many of the outrageous incidences concerning cop violence over the past few years were only made possible because of body cams, because they weren't smart enough to break them or turn them off beforehand. So that's been a pretty good development. But there are other issues too, like we just talked about that, the broader cycle of violence and economic exploitation in certain neighborhoods, particularly black ones. Where cops are basically the hand of the state in keeping these people as a perpetual underclass.
Yeah, the body cameras are massive, and I really can't emphasize them enough. I know I was basically there during the rollout of the body cameras, and I also was becoming a cop during some of this most, vociferous anti-police rhetoric. So I feel like I kind of, came into being a cop when being a cop was least popular and when some of the most contentious stuff was going down.
You would have become a cop right around the Zimmerman case, right?
I actually became a cop right around, I think we were literally watching Mike Brown on television.
Nice.
Maybe that was a little bit after I joined. But it was basically from early 2015 to, mid 2019. So it was kind of during a lot of the big things, and it was after Zimmerman, which, he wasn't a cop, but I think he still highlights a lot of these problems of, basically people being profiled and attacked, whether or not they were committing crimes is a different thing. I think I mentioned that I had some weird Zimmerman shit one time. I actually met him. Believe it or not.
How'd that go?
And, it was weird as shit. So basically, he actually tries to take like a fairly cowboy mentality about it, where like he's like the big bald fucking badass for chasing down a teenager and shooting him in the chest.
Zimmerman is a subhuman piece of shit. There is no like expression of contempt significant enough to express my feelings. He sold off the gun that killed, that killed the kid for like, what was it, $250,000, $500,000? Recently?
Yeah, and he's like he's like millions and millions of dollars in debt. And then so kind of to share this without making comment on it, but
Mm-hmm.
he apparently like some rich conservatives have been giving him places to stay because there's obviously continual threats on his life, and he's like some kind of weird folk hero to, I don't know, Nazis or something.
Yeah.
But then also with his legal trial, this is where things get fucked up, right? Because I'm not defending the guy, fucking asshole and kind of a piece of shit.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things was one of the things was prosecutorial misconduct. So some of the people that I was trained by were actually tangentially involved in the case. And apparently there was some evidence that the state held back during the prosecution that would have been not exculpatory, but at least it would have cast even more doubt on Trayvon Martin's innocence as far as the battery goes. And they withheld it. So whatever the female prosecutor who's in charge of that case is actually liable to be disbarred for holding back evidence that was damning to Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, well, the DA put forward the wrong charge to begin with anyway. Didn't they put in like second-degree murder? It should have been manslaughter. That would have been a much easier charge to prove.
Which is actually something that I brought up in my own video, kind of about policing. I think I have 3 or 4 videos now about policing right now. But one of the things that the DAs do is they overcharge cops during these contentious shootings, and that feels good to the public, right?
Because they know it's not going to go through.
It's not going to stick. And they could charge them with multiple crimes at the same time in order to get one to stick. They could charge manslaughter. They could charge murder too. They could charge like multiple charges and then see which one sticks, but they don't. They charge the highest one. They have a high drama court case. Everybody gets their emotions out through the court case. It ends up getting dismissed or not guilty or whatever. The cop walks free, and that's kind of how it is. Even in the most egregious of cases. Like, I think the only person who actually went to jail who kind of deserved it was it North Carolina, the guy who shot the guy in the back as he was running away?
That sounds familiar. I don't remember exactly, but that does sound right.
Yeah, and one of the things that actually happened, which again, it's like a detail of the case. I'm not defending it or lauding it or anything like that. But I think his whole justification in his own mind was, I think his taser got lost in the scuffle.
Mm-hmm.
So when the guy was running away, he was like, "Oh, well, this guy has my taser. Therefore, based on rules of engagement or per policy, I can kill him because if I'm incapacitated by my taser, then he can take my gun and kill me." That's literally like, I don't know if it's case law, but I think it's supported within the structure or within like legal precedent or at least policy precedent.
Do you feel...
So he basically thought he had a green light. Well, and then just 5 more seconds.
Oh, yeah.
When it looked like he was planting something on the guy, I think he was actually planting his own taser closer to the body. So if you wouldn't have had that cell phone video of him shooting this guy in the back, you would not have known. Basically, it would have been completely acquitted.
Do you feel as though the fact that there's this commiseration between the state and the police department when it comes to trying officers, do you feel this means that there's really no reasonable way a civilian can have an expectation of good conduct on the part of police officers? It seems like all of the systems which are supposed to ensure that people who are working and operating in society are good, functional people don't function for cops. Their workplace doesn't check them, at least not as much as I think most people would agree they should be checked. And the state doesn't seem to check them nearly as hard as they should. And it seems like even though they're given the most responsibility, or I guess the most power, they're held the least accountable. And it makes it really difficult to trust cops as anything other than thugs who are occasionally given legal permission to kill when they feel threatened.
Well, and that's actually that's actually kind of antithetical to the police department or the police perspective, which feels like they're literally putting their lives on the line. They're sacrificing families. They're missing holidays. They're missing weekends. The cop schedule is not the best schedule in the world. They're doing these sacrifices because they genuinely love the job and they want to serve their community. Yeah, they fuck up, but at the same time, they're basically making this semi-noble sacrifice. They're working these crazy hours. They're putting their lives on the line. Like I almost, there's a few times that I definitely thought I was going to die, and I was working in a city of 15,000 people. There was a few times where I thought I was going to have to kill someone. And again, I was working in a smaller town. So all of these sacrifices, sorry, just one more second.
Yeah.
All of these sacrifices that you make on an individual level, and then especially with the body cameras and the dash cameras and all that kind of stuff, you feel constantly under the scrutiny of your department and your public. And then also, it might not come down to a shooting, like a high level legal shooting, but police departments, if they like you, they will cover for you. If they don't like you, they will deep fry you. And that's kind of, this very subtle thing where it's like big case shooting. The Fraternal Order of Police lawyers are going to come out and they're going to defend you tooth and nail, basically on principle. But your police department itself, if you screw up something that's minor and they don't like you, they can basically take all of your minor misconduct and fire you and basically black mark you from working in the job again.
Yeah, which is, but that's how they keep their ranks, orthodox. I imagine one of the ways, if you have people who don't really fit in with the frat culture, then you can just find an excuse, The same thing happens in retail. You can get written up over nothing if, you're not liked by your manager. But this is one of the issues that I have with discourse concerning cops. We talk about they have a stressful job, and they do, and that their lives are threatened off, and they do. But pizza delivery drivers die more often than cops do. There are actually a lot of jobs that get people killed with greater frequency than cops. And there are jobs that work worse hours too, and we don't use this like as a carte blanche permission to deny the fact that the frequent abuses of power and unwarranted aggression against civilians are, it's a national topic of discussion now. It on so much of it feels self-inflicted.
We don't have a war. Whenever we don't have a war, cop stuff is the hot button issue. If we were invading Iran right now, we'd be talking about it, and it's because people.
But that's
love
not
blood.
good, though. That's.
Oh no, it's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of what people focus on. Again, not a moral judgment, not a legal judgment, not anything like that. And is there room for opportunity and growth? I absolutely think so. And we can definitely discuss those issues as well. I would love to discuss those issues. But we're kind of describing reality as we find it. And we also need to discuss how do we improve these things. If you're talking about banning law, like what do people say sometimes, like, abolish cops or something like that. Even if you eliminated the institution of police and socialist revolution, left-wing revolution, you would still need to replace that social role with somebody who had identical responsibilities and identical power, or maybe not identical power, but close to the same power and role, societal roles, and you would have to call them something else. So I think the more productive conversation, we can definitely talk about fucked up shit and blood sports, and I have no problem. I'm definitely down for that.
Well, that's the issue, though, right? Community policing, I think, would be a pretty decent substitute for the modern police force in a lot of ways, but they would function more as community service officers, not as armored state, military forces running around with essentially no legal oversight for whatever shenanigans they happen to get into. Just like we talk as though the way police are is some kind of inevitable product of society as it exists, but just 50 or 60 years ago, police were nothing like what they are today. Police back then, and they were racist little shits. Back then, many cases today.
I was about to say, Nick Fuentes might have something to say.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not denying that or nothing. But if we take a look at how police acted, were expected to act, how they looked, how they were armed, and what they were expected to do, just a few decades ago, it's a massive change, but crime has been down over the past 40 years since the 1980s, which means that in spite of the fact that our country is getting safer, police are getting more aggressive, better armed, and are being handed like military surplus, which belies, I think, a pretty substantial imbalance between the way in which police are responding to our world and the way in which the world is responding to the existence of the police.
Well, and then I have a contentious question for you. I think violence peaked in 1994. That was also the beginning of the era of mass incarceration. So something that nobody really wants to talk about, but I think is maybe not a valid critique, because I think there's other factors, for instance, improvement in entertainment and improvement in medical technology. But the drop in crime has almost completely correlated, not causated, correlated with the era of mass incarceration. So this era of broken windows policing and totalitarian policing, kind of getting away from the community service model and turning to the war on drugs model, it has horrible, 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 horrible secondary side effects that I think we can discuss at length. And I think there's a better way to do things and to get back to the community oriented model. But you can't, if you're looking at the drop in crime, conservatives who want to defend the era of mass incarceration are going to tell you it's because of broken windows, it's because of stop and frisk, it's because of aggressive policing.
Well,
That's
I
why
mean,
you've
of
cut
course, but
violent crime
you could justify
in
that
half.
infinitely. You could live in a fascist state with minimal crime and say like, oh, well, of course crime is low. Look, we have police in
Yeah.
every corner.
Look how great it is. We've
Yeah,
turned
exactly.
ourselves into
But
an Orwellian nightmare. It's
yeah,
great.
exactly. But with regards to the decrease in crime, I think that could also be attributed largely to a decrease in lead paint being used in underserved communities, which has been lead paint exposure at youth has been shown to massively increase like the rate of criminality because it poisons your brain. But also, a lot of the crime uptick was because of the drug war, which was a completely unnecessary political bent to begin with. Almost like they created a problem that they knew would disproportionately affect like black communities, and then introduced mass incarceration, which they get to conveniently extract slave labor from, as a solution to that problem. I'm not convinced that police are the cause or solution to that problem. I think the state was the cause of it, and the state now presents itself as the only solution, when in reality, abolishing the war on drugs probably would have had a much better impact on general crime than any amount of policing or incarceration could ever be.
Well, I would want to see that. I would want to see that, borne out in studies like, Portugal or Spain did decriminalization and, started the rehab centers. I think Switzerland has drug rehab centers that basically people can shoot up, methadone or whatever the substitute drug is. Basically, if dollar for dollar, you can prove to law enforcement and prove to Republican representatives, because I do consider myself a Republican, if you could show them that dollar for dollar rehabilitation is cheaper than incarceration, I think you could actually get a pretty strong Republican argument for it.
I've talked with Republicans. I really just think they don't like black and poor people very much.
I know, but you got to work with the ones that are good. You know what I'm saying? Like if I look for pieces of shit on the left, I can find them.
Yeah, but there are pieces of shit on the left, but the broad constituency of left-leaning voters aren't literally motivated by a hatred of those of lower social standing. I've had so many conversations on like, hey, we should invest in sex education. It pays dividends in the long run. Nope.
What,
hey,
you want to
we
have sex with my kid?
well, but that's what I get. Hey, we should invest in contraceptive aid to underserved communities. It pays back $7 for every buck invested because you have less fucking welfare babies down the line.
Take that argument to Nick Fuentes. He'll probably fucking love that.
Well, you want to reward these slutty black whores who can't close their legs? Oh, hey, we should invest in any.
Talk to him about birth. He'll probably fucking love it. Like that's what I'm saying. And like we need to, you've said that your axiomatic perspective is the well-being of human beings in general and utilitarian perspective. I'm with you in that. I think we need to focus on efficacy, not on, reals over fields. How do we actually solve these problems? And I think there's something to be said too. So, like R versus K, sexual reproduction amongst species. Nick Fuentes seems to think that applies solely to people of different races. Maybe that's taken him out of context, but fuck him a little bit. But right, but like the reproduction styles of rabbits versus blue whales. You know what I'm saying? But if you look at humans socioeconomically, the fastest way for people to decrease their birth rate is basically to make them middle class. The reason why I have one kid and I only want two is because I know that each child is a demand on my responsibilities and my ability to parent and my time and my energy. So I want to invest in a small amount of children and raise them right. I also know that they're not going to die. If you're in sub-Saharan Africa and you know that 3 of your kids are going to die if you have 7 of them due to malnutrition, war, genocide, whatever, you're going to have a different reproductive strategy. Modern technology like a stable food supply, foreign aid, all that kind of stuff, it can basically make it so, middle class Western habits are not universally adopted.
Yeah,
Globe.
but conservatives literally don't give a shit about these arguments. You can argue like, oh my god, the birth rate for these communities is skyrocketing. We're going to be drowned in a tide of brown bodies. And you go,
let's give them condoms.
well, hey, reproductive aid, sex education, and raise their standard of living, and they'll be having 2.2 children just like the rest of the developed world.
No. Send them back to Nicaragua.
But you joke, but this is my experience arguing with conservatives on these issues, which is why I feel I can't talk about stuff like ending the drug war. I've had this conversation with a guy called Extreme Dad on my channel. I doubt you would find him a political compatriot. I don't think he's a conservative in the same way that you are, but the attitude, the mentality seems the same. Portugal's drug policy, the decriminalization, seems to have worked out phenomenally for their country. It's not flawless, but it's going about pretty well.
Vosh, you want to give drug addicts heroin? You fucking piece of shit.
But I can't, and that's the thing. It's like, oh yeah, like people like blindly, like, yes, I think all police should be able to ride into fucking black neighborhoods with ATVs and start no-scoping people through the window if they hear a peep from a baby in a crib. Oh wait, right, you want to decriminalize drugs? Oh, what? You fucking want more crack babies? I can't. Policy-based discussions around police officers and the way in which crimes are handled are woefully ineffective in the political climate of this country. The only two stances that really seem to exist, maybe you could have three stances. There's stance, dipshit like crew cut since he was 16 years old, white boy in Alabama, you ain't touching my cops, cops are flawless gods that deserve no derision. You have the ACAB types, which I suppose I fit in on. And then you have these liberal milquetoast policies that probably do improve things, but will never, ever be able to address the broader institutional failings of the police, like the way the DA is complicit in how their crimes are handled, like the hyper-militarization of the police, like the fact that they're used as a necessary stimmy for problems caused by state policy like the drug war. You can't fix these things with body cams, but nobody's willing to have a conversation about it.
Bosh, you fucking racist. Are you saying you don't want Aboriginal transgender drug cops?
Well, you know, if they were policing Aboriginal transgender drug communities, statistically, they would be more likely to produce good results. So,
no, I'm obviously being a
no, I know.
But my point being is that like we need to have these conversations because the truth is we're basically allowing people who don't care or don't know run the conversation. We're letting people who don't care or don't know run politics. And you know, there was this whole nihilism. I'm a little bit older than you. I'm 32 this year. So
a fair bit for someone who's 32.
Yeah, I've lived an interesting life. And you know, Indiana Jones says, you know, it's not the mileage. I feel every bit of that mileage. But the point being that we're basically we're telling people to not give a shit. We're also telling people that their language has no effect on exterior reality. At least that's what, you know, was popularly sold during the thousands when Eminem came out and was talking about, you know, basically using every slur in the world. And, you know, the teenagers loved it because they wanted to be edgy and piss off.
Right.
We were basically told that words didn't have meaning, and anybody who took seriously was basically an old stupid phony.
Yeah, the South Park philosophy towards linguistics. Yeah,
right. Which is, you know, say I was a fan of South Park. I think they've kind of taken their foot off the gas for the past few years and have had some pretty bad takes. But in general, what I would like to see is for us to start giving a shit about the language that we use again. I would like us to see that our words do have impact. So for instance, I have to give you credit. I have to give ContraPoints credit. And this is kind of like where I really don't agree with the woke scolds who come and constantly attack you. And as much as I might be a political opponent, I hope you take this as an extreme compliment. But your stand for ContraPoints or whatever is completely valid. I don't think I took any leftist perspectives genuinely and in good faith until I started watching ContraPoints videos. And she moved me on quite a few subjects. Same thing with you. I don't think I thought libertarian socialism viable perspective until I started listening to you. I still have Republican views. I still have not necessarily Darwinian, but I still have like you know, there's functional models and there's dysfunctional models. I don't care about your utopia if it doesn't work in pragmatic reality, no matter how much I might love it in theory. So I'm still holding on to my imperfect world because I don't know if a better world is possible. However, I am much, 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 much more receptive to you, to ContraPoints, to a bunch of lefties. I'm much more interested in leftist arguments because basically what happened for the past 3 to 5 years was I was just harangued by woke scolds for taking milquetoast Republican stands. Like the mildest of stands. Like, hey, maybe not all cops are bastards. It's like, what, you fucking Nazi Gestapo piece of shit? You fucking hate black people? Blah, blah, blah. And how quickly do I want to modify my political perspectives to listen to anything you have to say when you're basically just scolding me for holding what amounts to a moderate right-wing position?
I don't even think that would be a moderate right wing. I think even most like liberals in this country would agree with that. I agree.
Yeah, but I think we can agree on fuck liberals.
Yeah, we can. Goddamn right we can. There are a lot of lefties out there who get really accustomed to their own little bubbles, and they completely forget how to engage with people who don't share their sort of political orthodoxy. Even if you disagree with people, I think that people need to make a reasonable assessment as to whether or not derision or open engagement is the right response. And a lot of lefties are way too quick to go right to the derision. Presumably as a self-defense mechanism, which I can understand, but I don't think it's a very effective strategy.
Well, and like offered as like a mild critique too. Like, dude, I have no problems watching you fucking go off because, the logical consistency is there, your worldview is there, all that kind of shit. But for the people who are watching, I can see them, basically going, oh, this guy's all pissed off. Argument. Whereas I feel like if you just let people give themselves enough rope in order to fucking hang themselves, you'd be fucking dominating. You'd be fucking killing. Like that's what you're saying. You've said repeatedly that as much as you don't like Destiny's new anti-leftist takes, you're a big fan of his rhetoric and his skill in that assessment. I think you would probably be as talented in that regard if you could do the same thing he does, which is basically let somebody go out on a fucking limb and then chop that shit off. Like,
that's something that I've been trying to work on. It's something that I did poorly in the Sargon debate. You should never make attacks against positions that have it. You should always, when you debate somebody, you're both building sandcastles, and you have to finish the castle before you can lob rocks at the other person's. If a person hasn't established an argument,
he never built a fucking castle. He just sat there. He just sat there and talked.
But exactly, that's the thing. I didn't wait for anything to be built. I should have prompted and prodded until he tentatively, anxiously assembled something resembling an argument, and then made fun of that. But I didn't. And I agree, that is a very valuable skill.
You're saying that pulling up like dumbass Medium articles, half reading them, and then arguing against them isn't a political
exactly
thing?
5 minutes into them. Sometimes, I will say it, sometimes I feel a little guilty because my job is like way the fuck easier than so many other people's. But then then I can look over at my good friend Sargon, and I know I'm actually a fucking workhorse compared to some people because their standards always go lower.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to blow you, even if you'd like that, but you are a fucking killer, man. Fucking, you do good work. I very much appreciate it, and I'll be a fan for probably going into the future. But that's part of the reason why I've wanted to enter this space for a really long time. I've wanted to do mass public advocacy, share my perspectives, try to show everybody how big of a fucking galaxy brain I am for my own ego for a really long time. And the reason why I wanted to do that was because A, I think I'm awesome, which is of course shitty and narcissistic to say, but B, because I just see all these assholes with really bad takes. And I basically spent the past decade really kicking my own ass in the military, in law enforcement. So hopefully when it finally came time for me to say something, I had some information to offer. And that's kind of where I'm at now. And that's why I harassed you for the past 90 days so we could talk.
Yeah, it's always hard to get on here too, because I tend to get anxious when speaking with people who I know I won't be having an active debate with. I do, well,
okay,
you know what I mean, like blood sports.
Bosh, you're a piece of shit.
Yeah, there we, all right, now we're getting into it. I do wish, and one of the things that really frustrates me too, I think in the long run, is that I'm pretty far left leaning. I think most people would agree with that. I don't actually mind discussing like what would be conservative policy. I just wish it was more fact-based. If there are people out there who are saying like, hey, I understand ACAB, cool, whatever. However, empirically speaking, here are the consequences of abolishing police. Empirically speaking, it's politically inefficacious to do this or that. Empirically speaking, austerity measures are the only way of balancing the budget right now. If I could have conversations on like hard, like reasonable positions like that, even if I strongly disagree with the ideological presumptions that are made behind the scenes, it would be so much more gratifying. But you're right. I mean, most of YouTube in general, most of the internet in general, but in this instance, most of conservative advocacy online is fucking delusional, and it's honestly just so disheartening. I can't, and the same level of discourse is taking place in our representative bodies as well, in the halls of Congress and the Senate. It doesn't get any better if you go up.
Well, and
it's pretty wild.
if so, maybe another time, because I am enjoying the conversation we're having now, and I don't want to tangent too hard. But if you ever wanted to throw bombs at me, get some blood sports or something like that, we could talk about foreign policy, Islam, the family, like conservative values, all that kind of stuff, and maybe we could get into attention there. But I'm not here purely for blood sports, even if that's good for metrics. And that's the thing too. Like, I feel like everybody that within your community, especially on your Discord or whatever, whenever we've talked, it's been largely positive. Like, even if we disagree on policy, it's almost uniquely basically saying like, hey, I give a shit about the world, I give a shit about other people, I want to see the world become a better place, I feel like people are being taken advantage of, and I want to change it. That's such like a positive fucking thing. And I really feel like my generation, the millennials, they kind of failed on a social level to really give a shit and give a shit about each other. So to see the Zoomers, whether or not they're Nazis or commies, they basically yeah. Well, but I don't think it would be that hard to modify their positive intentions. I don't think it would be that hard. Well, maybe it is very hard, and maybe that's actually the thing that we need to deal with most over the next few decades. But expanding their definition of who they see as their in-group is entirely necessary to avoiding an upcoming civil war.
Yeah. Which I don't think we're going to be able to avoid anyway.
Okay. Well, that'll be fun. That'll be good for metrics.
Well, hopefully we'll be on the same side. Okay. Listen. Hey. on that blessed day. Okay. Maybe not. Maybe not. ACAB.
Dude. But this could be like like the classic story where they end up having to kill each other despite liking each other. Like if you side with the tankies, and then I have to go with the Republicans, but then there's like fascist infiltrators. We'll just have to kill each other, but it'll be a great saga.
You've seen the meme with like the baby holding the handgun while crying and turning away from the camera, right? Like, oh god, I have to do this, Yeah,
hey man, it'll be great for the metrics.
It will be. Hey, at least I'll go out with a burst of subs. Hey, I really appreciate speaking with you. I hope we can do it again in the future.
Oh, dude, basically let me know anytime. Obviously, I don't want time, but we could talk about my experience in the military, and also my dad was basically a part of the dreaded military industrial complex. We could talk about that. I'm a huge politics and history buff, huge nerd in all of these respects. I'm sorry we didn't get as meaty or contentious as we could have, but I'm very happy to do that any day.
I got a lot of that yesterday. It's okay. Variety is the spice of life. Could you shout yourself out for the for everyone else?
Yeah, I'll actually I'll throw a link to my channel in chat, and basically do that. But I'm just on YouTube as Counterpoints. I'm sure there's 10,000 other channels with the same name, but I'll put my link in there.
There you go. You've been added. Discord. You've been added as the guest command. Your YouTube's now up there.
Okay. Well, and then I have a simple ask before I leave for your consideration, not as a demand. Maybe just maybe consider me moving into more than one voice chat group besides Chud, because Chud's pretty dead, and I came here to talk with lefties, not just Chuds.
I give you executive de-chudding juice. Okay, hold on.
Jesus Christ! All right, I feel fucking honored. I promise not to abuse it.
Gotcha. Hey, have a good one, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me, bud. You have a great one.
You too. Ah, fuck, damn it. He's gone, right? Hello? Shit, I was gonna say, have that we all say hello to your baby. I really like that guy. Here, there you go. I free him from his prison. I give him executive. I stamp. Not a chud.